You're watching Al Jazeera. I'm Rob Matheson with continuing breaking news coverage of U.S. military strikes on Iran. Tehran accuses the U.S. of betraying international diplomacy by attacking 3 nuclear sites in the country.
We were in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans. Happened only 2 days ago in Geneva, when this time Americans decided to blow it up.
Overnight, President Trump ordered stealth bombers to strike at the heart of Iran's nuclear program.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace.
Hours after the strikes, Iran fired another barrage of missiles against Israel. At least 20 people have been injured. And also on the program, the death toll keeps on rising from Israel's assault on Gaza. Palestinians desperate for aid are being killed. Iran's foreign minister is accusing the U.S. of betraying diplomacy. Abbas Araghchi has made the comments in the past hour following the U.S. military's attack on Iran's 3 big nuclear sites. President Donald Trump ordered the strikes on the Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan plants, saying it was to prevent any nuclear threat from Tehran. Now, these are some of the images in the aftermath of the Fordow attack. The uranium enrichment facility is estimated to be 80 meters underground. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has called for an emergency board meeting.
We were in the middle of talks with the United States when Israelis blew it up. And again, we were in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans. Happened only 2 days ago in Geneva, when this time Americans decided to blow it up. So we were in diplomacy, but we were attacked militarily. So it was not Iran, but the US who betrayed diplomacy. They betrayed negotiations. When at the middle of negotiations with us, they gave green light to Israelis.
Well, we're going to be unpacking the latest developments with our correspondents in Tehran, Amman and Washington, D.C. First, we're going to go to Sinem Kosioglu in Istanbul. She was at the press conference where Iran's foreign minister has been speaking. I was just reading through some of the notes that have been made after that press conference. Pretty clear where Abbas Araghchi believes the blame for what is going on lies with the U.S., not only the U.S., of course, but with the IAEA as well. Give us a summary of your thoughts about what was going on.
Well, actually, Abbas Araghchi repeated what he has been tweeting and sharing since yesterday as he arrived in Istanbul after his talks with the European diplomats. And he underlined that his country was on the table for negotiations, but he was betrayed by the United States, by the European countries. And he said that they are ready to respond. They will be responding. And according to the Iranian diplomacy tradition, the conventions of the Iranian diplomacy, they need to respond. Whether it will be a small response or a big one, no one has any idea. But they sure are planning for an attack. When he was asked another question, he mentioned that he doesn't have the authority to reveal what Iran is going to do next. But his sentence was this: "We will respond." And apparently, Iran is upset about what has been going on because they say their nuclear project was peaceful and they weren't aiming for a nuclear weapon, and they have been accusing the International Atomic Agency for not being clear with the United States. If they were clear about saying that they haven't enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon and there was no risk, this wouldn't happen as per the Iranian authorities and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. That's why he's asking for the UN Security Council for an emergency meeting. Iran's UN ambassador wrote a letter to the UN regarding this request early morning on Sunday. And he's also asking, calling on the International Atomic Agency to do its job, to be in line with international law and binding agreements. And when he was asked about whether Iran is planning to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, again, he said that if Iran is following the rules, but no others are following, then what is the use of those international treaties and organizations? Apparently now they are also calculating the damages of these attacks, recent attacks by the United States over the night, the Israeli attacks so far, and they are planning for their next move, which no one has any idea about yet. Back to you.
Sinem, as I understand it as well, he was also, however, calling for a UN Security Council meeting, an emergency meeting to discuss what's been going on.
Well, yes, this is what they are aiming for, because even at the OIC summit in Istanbul, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Countries, their foreign ministers have been gathering since yesterday. The aim was to make a call to the UN Security Council to push for further intervention on Israel. But over the night, we saw that the United States attacked the nuclear facilities of Iran, and now this gets more vigilant because the U.S. is the strongest member of the United Nations. But this is what Mr. Arakci mentioned. He said the U.S. actually violated the United Nations Charter. They actually cheated on their own voters. This is what he said. We haven't heard about any emergency meeting yet, but probably the UN Security Council is going to respond this very quickly, and we will hear. But what the UN Security Council will do is also another question, because on one side you have the strongest member, United States, and Israel, who is a very strong element apparently in the domestic politics of the United States as well. It will be an interesting scene to wait and see.
Sinem, thank you very much indeed. Sinem Kosioglu there talking to us from Istanbul. We're going to go to Ali Hashim in the Iranian capital, Tehran. Perhaps not a surprise, the tone that Iran's foreign minister was giving in that statement, clearly condemning the actions of the US, Israel, and also the IAEA.
Well, Rob, for now, what we have is two layers of Iranian response to what happened. So we don't know yet what's the retaliation. What we saw now from Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Istanbul, add to that what we heard from the IRGC here in Tehran, is just an ambiguous response to what happened. Both the Foreign Ministry that Mr. Araghchi represents and the IRGC are under the Supreme National Security Council. So when the Supreme National Security Council here in Iran decides what's the retaliation, then we will hear the second part of the answer. And that's why we had Mr. Araghchi saying in his answers that he is not in a position right now to say what they are going to do. And there are several options in front of Iran. The main issue is that when this council convenes and takes the decision, then Mr. Araghchi, the IRGC, who I'm going to read their statement, they issued a statement just a few minutes ago also, saying that Washington has now placed itself on the front line of aggression by directly attacking peaceful installations. They also said that the locations from which the aircraft involved in this aggression took off have been identified and under surveillance. And as they also said that they've repeatedly declared the number and scale of U.S. military bases in the region are not source of strength, rather a major vulnerability, and that in response to the act of aggression, the attacks will continue on Israel, what they call the Operation True Promise 3, will continue with a precise, targeted, and severe manner against the infrastructure, strategic centers, and interests of the Israelis. Furthermore, today's act of aggression by the terrorist U.S. regime, as per the statement, has compelled the Islamic Republic of Iran, within its legitimate right to self-defense, to consider responses that go beyond the delusional calculations. Now, this is what the IRGC said. Even Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Now, there are several automatic responses that people would have expected. For example, exiting the Non-Proliferation Treaty. He criticized the non-proliferation situation right now that the United States has put the world in, but he did not touch on this. Also, with respect to closing the Hormuz Strait, which was something we heard a lot on TV, Iranian officials been saying that immediately they are going to close this strait. There's no mention of this, neither the foreign minister nor the IRGC, also with respect to the attacks. So what we can just wrap now, and the takeaway of what we heard from Araghchi and the IRGC is that till the moment the position is ambiguous. They're all waiting the National Security Council to agree on the manner of the retaliation, and then we'll start hearing from the Iranians.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the statement that you've been referring to there, Ali, and I understand what you mean about it being somewhat ambiguous and leaving the kind of door open for the IRGC and for Iran generally in terms of its response. I would also imagine that the level and direction of the response is also going to be determined by the level of damage that the nuclear facilities in Iran have sustained. Do we have any indication yet of what kind of damage has been done by the U.S. attacks?
Well, Rob, we have to take into consideration a major issue here. The sovereignty of Iran has been breached. This alone, according to the Iranian narrative, requires a response. Now, regardless of what's the amount of damage. Now, according to what we've been hearing from Iranian officials, from the Iranian nuclear agency, from the advisor to the parliament, that the amount of damage is not complete. I mean, the idea is that the places, the facilities were not completely destroyed. And also, what we've been hearing from Behrouz Kamalvandi, the spokesperson to the Iranian nuclear agency in the past days, he said that Iran has already transported and transferred the enriched uranium stockpile and also a lot of technology from that place. The satellite imagery shows more than 20 trucks moving from the Fordow nuclear facility and outside on the 20th and the 21st of June. Also, the UK-based website Amouage revealed, according to the reporting, that the United States already told Iran in advance that it's going to hit here and there, and the timing. So the Iranians had a lot of time, something similar to what happened in Ain al-Assad in 2020 when Iran informed the Americans in advance to their retaliation to the killing of General Soleimani.
Ali Hashem in Tehran there. Ali, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Noor Odeh. She's joining us from Jordan's capital, and she's in Amman because the Israeli government's banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. So while those attacks were going on by the U.S. in response to that, we've also had Iranian attacks on Israel. What's been happening?
Rob, two successive volleys of about 27 missiles came from Iran to Israeli cities, making impact in Haifa and the larger Tel Aviv area, and Rishon LeZion, in Bat Yam, and other neighborhoods. There weren't a lot of casualties reported, despite the extensive damage that we saw to buildings, especially in the Tel Aviv area. 26 Israelis injured, one moderately. We are also hearing about an investigation launched by the Israeli army because a missile made impact in Haifa before the sirens went off. Now, most probably, according to some estimate, that was an interception missile, but we remain, waiting for the outcome of that investigation if it is made public because, again, the Israeli military censor controls the knowledge that we can share with our viewers during these days because the restrictions are really severe and the punishment could be imprisonment for journalists who share information not cleared by the censor.
Noor, what's been the wider reaction in Israel, with Israelis waking up to the news that they have been attacked, but of course also to the news of the U.S. strikes in Iran?
Well, the news of the U.S. strike was received with a lot of celebration in Israel. Politically speaking, this was a big win for Benjamin Netanyahu after decades of lobbying for U.S. involvement, for the U.S. taking the lead in attacking Iran because Israel doesn't have the technical capacity to attack Fordow, for example. He has done it. And so this is something that he really highlighted and focused on in his message in Hebrew. In English, he mostly showered Donald Trump with praise. Some of his ministers even said that Donald Trump was a messenger of God because of what he did. And of course, even the opposition leaders, even people who are on the opposite side of politics from Netanyahu, welcomed the U.S. action and thanked Donald Trump for standing with Israel. The Israeli president as well, thanking Donald Trump and saying that this was a testament to that strategic, unshakable bond between the two countries. Billboards in Tel Aviv have come up thanking Donald Trump for what he did. But of course, when you offset that with the missiles still coming in, with the prospect of even more Iranian retaliation, which we, still uncertain what kind of shape it would take, and the fact that more restrictions have been imposed on ordinary daily tasks in Israel because of that anticipation, then questions might arise, and they are already being put forward by some commentators, not all, although in the larger Jewish Israeli public, there is a lot of support for attacking Iran.
That's Noor O'Day in Jordan's capital, Amman. Noor, thank you very much indeed. Well, Donald Trump's called on Iran to make peace quickly or risk further military action. We're going to be live in Washington, D.C. in a moment. But first, this report from our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett.
Just days after President Donald Trump said he would decide within 2 weeks whether to strike Iran, the U.S. commander-in-chief gave the order to attack.
Thank you very much.
Making the announcement Saturday night from the White House.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
The White House releasing these photos of Trump, his vice president, and top advisors watching the strikes unfold from the Situation Room. Using B-2 bombers, Trump says a payload of 30,000-pound bombs dropped on the Fordow nuclear facility. Tomahawk missiles were reportedly used to destroy the Natanz and Isfahan sites. Prior to the attack, Trump had been pushing Iran to make a deal to give up all nuclear enrichment, so the sovereign nation couldn't build a nuclear weapon. But Trump's 60-day deadline passed, and there was still no agreement. On day 61, Israeli fighter jets took action, hitting Tehran and other cities last week, killing some of Iran's top scientists and military officials. On Saturday, Trump said Israel's fight is also America's fight.
We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel.
Criticism from congressional Democrats was swift. Senator Chris Murphy posting on X, Trump has been goaded into these strikes by the perpetual cheerleader of war in the Middle East. All my thoughts tonight are for the safety of our personnel in the region. The U.S. has reportedly reached out to Iran, indicating the strikes were limited. Regime change isn't planned. The Trump administration hopes Iran will now return to the negotiating table, warning Iran if there's retaliation, there'll be more attacks.
There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left.
The White House has not yet released an assessment of just how much damage was caused by the U.S. strikes on Iran's 3 nuclear sites. That bomb damage assessment is likely to be made public when the Secretary of Defense holds his briefing at the Pentagon on Sunday. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Alan Fisher is joining us from Washington, D.C. Alan, I think it's about 6:20 in the morning where you are. Are we getting any sort of indication of the reactions? Obviously, we've had the reactions from congressional members and so on, but the public is waking up to this. And so one would imagine is the White House. What are we hearing?
I mean, obviously, there's no monolith in the United States. You can't say that the American people are acting this way or this way. Certainly, the politicians reflect the broad feeling. On some degree, there is Republicans who support Donald Trump. They believe he has done the right thing. And on the other side, there are Republicans and Democrats who say that this was a very bad move by the United States. One of the biggest concerns, of course, is the intelligence. It's just March 26 when Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, who collates all the intelligence coming in to the United States, told Congress that there was no evidence that Iran was working towards a nuclear bomb, that there was no indication that they'd restarted the nuclear bomb program, which was suspended in 2013. Donald Trump, of course, has said that that is wrong, that she is wrong, in a very public rebuke. Tulsi Gabbard tried to claw back some of the ground between her and Donald Trump by reissuing her statement, missing out the key part at the beginning. But it's clear Americans are worried that they could be dragged in to a Middle East war on the basis of faulty intelligence, because it's not that long ago that that happened. And we saw the consequences of that with thousands of people being killed. Now, the United States will be making plans for what happens next. I was speaking to a military expert last night, and he said, look, after an attack like this, the next 48 hours are the most significant and most important. You wait to see what the reaction will be. But he pointed out 2 things. One, Donald Trump claiming complete and a spectacular success. He can't do that. He won't have, at that stage when he made that comment, any indication of just how much damage was inflicted on the Iranian nuclear sites. And the second thing he pointed out is you can make plans, you can decide what you're going to do, but your opponent also has a say, and how they respond will become key to what happens next.
Alan, thank you very much. Alan Fisher there talking to us from Washington, D.C. Hassan Ahmadian is an assistant professor at the University of Tehran. He's joining us from the Iranian capital. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. As Alan was just pointing out, essentially everybody is now watching to see what Iran does next. Do we have any indication of the kind of options that might be lying before it?
Well, the Iranians are playing by the book. The foreign minister spoke about a session that needs to be convened at the Security Council. They are, trying to isolate the United States legally, internationally, and provided that, and as experience suggests, nothing will really happen there, the Iranians will take action on their own. And this action can take different forms. They already launched an unprecedented attack on Israel as a retaliation for its aggression, but also they ratcheted up the attack, I think, as a response also to a U.S. doing Israeli bidding when it comes to attacking Iran's nuclear sites. Moving forward, I mean, the attack seems to be choreographed and given the info before attacking to Iran indicates a U.S. Different approach this time around, and the Iranians will take that into account when responding to the United States. And I think the Iranians have indicated that they have a right to respond. Now, how and when, it's really still not clear. I think the Iranians will have to do a reaction, because non-action is not an option for the United States. Might go even further in its assault on Iran. So far, it has been limited, and the information that were given to Iran gave it time to move out much of its assets there in the sites that were targeted. So it's a bit of a limited assault on Iran, but still, it's violation of international law, violation of IAEA Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is a member, the US is a member. They attacked a nuclear peaceful program that that's fully under IAEA inspection. They basically violated each and every law when it comes to the international community. And so the Iranians are banking on that to push back against the US. But at the same time, as I said, they might see it at one point when the international community is not doing much to take things into their hands, moving against American bases or assets around the region in Iran's vicinity.
So we heard Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi talking in the last hour or so, and he was condemning the US, he was condemning Israel, he was also condemning the IAEA. But our correspondent Ali Hashim was pointing out what he did not do was suggest, for example, that Iran would pull out of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Do you think that is an option that Iran might be considering?
Being in the NPT really doesn't make sense anymore. A non-NPT member that is a nuclear state has attacked Iran's nuclear installation, and the IAEA is so far short of issuing even a statement of condemnation. Now an NPT member, which is also a nuclear power, has attacked Iran's nuclear sites, and no sign of indications of any reaction by the IAEA. So the NPT is not doing anything for Iran to protect and shield its facilities against aggression, which is a stark violation of its charter. And I think the Iranians might take that into account. They are thinking about their options. I think there are a variety of options. NPT exiting is one of them for sure. Nuclear ambiguity, which follows after an NPT withdrawal, is another. A retaliation against assets around the region is another. And of course, doubling down on attacking Israel in retaliation for its attacks is another option that the Iranians have already did. So it remains to be seen whether Iran decides to notify the IAEA of its willingness to withdraw from the NPT. But I think that's a very strong option that Iran has, and I think if it is the case, the essence of the talks between Iran and the United States, Iran and the West, will change drastically. The talks will be focused on how to convince Iran, or as some suggest, force it to go back to the NPT. There will be a month after the notification, and after the month is finished, Iran will be out of the NPT. And I think that gives Iran a leverage that is currently lacking, but that's an option.
Our correspondent Kimberly Halkett, in her report just a moment ago, was saying that the US had reportedly reached out to Iran to report that the strikes they had made were limited and that regime change isn't planned. Is that something that Iran would believe?
Yeah, well, there is no trust in what the United States is saying. They said they were talking with the Iranians, and there were 5 rounds of talks, and one was scheduled, but they were surprisingly attacked by the Israelis, and that opportunity is gone for now. There were talks just 2 days ago with Europeans, and the United States this time around basically done away with with those talks. And I think whenever the Iranians went for talks, the United States and the Israelis seized each and every opportunity to blow them up. And I think the Iranians the trust already was very limited. Nowadays, it's non-existent. And so the talks about Iran getting back to negotiations is basically, it's not relevant to the situation we're in, because Iran was on the table, Iran was negotiating, Iran was in talks with the United States and then with Europe all were in vain when it comes to the attacks that Iran received after basically reaching out and trying to settle this diplomatically.
Hassan and Marian, good to get your thoughts on this. Thank you very much for being with us on Al Jazeera. You're watching Al Jazeera. If you're just joining us, here's a quick reminder of the latest developments in our breaking news coverage of the Israel-Iran conflict, which the U.S. has now entered. Iran's foreign minister says the U.S. crossed a red line by attacking its three main nuclear sites. Abbas Araghchi says diplomacy is no longer an option as the Americans only understand the language of threat and force. And the U.S. president says a full payload of bombs was dropped on each Iranian nuclear site. Donald Trump says operations at the Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan plants have been totally obliterated. Iran has retaliated to the U.S. attacks by firing missiles into Israel. They struck northern and central areas, including the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa. And the Israeli military says at least 27 rockets were fired from Iran in two separate waves. At least 27 people have been injured. Rescue workers are searching through damaged buildings in Tel Aviv. Ofer Hassif is a Knesset member. He's also a member of the Hadash movement. He's joining us live from Rehovot in Israel. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Would it be fair to say that Israelis now are somewhat tense and waiting to see what kind of response Iran is going to make longer term to the U.S. attacks?
Yeah, of course, nobody really knows what's going to happen. I personally lament the involvement of the United States, just like I lament the whole situation. This war could have been prevented in the first place. And unfortunately, too many forces were interested, each and one of them for his own interests. And that's what we've got. At the end, as always, the peoples of the region are paying the price. The Iranians, the Israelis, the Palestinians, let's not forget that Gaza is still going on through a terrible genocide and starvation. The Israeli hostages are held there, and nobody really seems to care given the smokescreen of the Israeli war with Iran. So, but as to the future, nobody really knows what's going to happen. And as I said, I surely hope that this nightmare is going to over soon for everybody who's involved.
We're still obviously waiting to see what kind of reaction Iran is going to provide longer term with regard to what has been happening in terms of the U.S. Attacks. Is there a feeling, do you think, in Israel that people are going to be safer as a result of these U.S. attacks, or do you think that the threats and their origins may simply change?
First of all, I have to emphasize that I am interested in the well-being and safety and security of everybody, of all the peoples, including the Israelis, of course. Now, I'm afraid that now we are going towards the abyss even more than before. You know, it seems that too many people now are in euphoria, but they also were in such an euphoria, you know, in the United States, in Israel, in some other places, after the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. I remember that Netanyahu then said, and let's not forget that he was one of those who encouraged George W. Bush to invade and attack Iraq then. And then Netanyahu said that there was going to be, and I quote him, a positive chain reaction. And as we all know, it turned to be a complete nonsense and ended with the rise of ISIS, with a terrible bloodbath in the whole region. So now again, Netanyahu, as well as Trump and some others, are still in euphoria and pride and say more or less the same things, that there's going to be a positive chain reaction, that there's going to be, as Netanyahu said then, perhaps even democratization of some regimes. I'm afraid that we are going to face something exactly the opposite, just like happened 20 years ago, although the circumstances are radically different. But still, what kind of reaction are we going to, should we expect? More blood and more destruction? That's what I'm afraid of. I can tell you one thing, if I may, that the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza who continue to be slaughtered and starved are not in euphoria. The Israeli hostages and their families are not in euphoria. The Palestinians in the occupied West Bank who've been assaulted by settlers and the occupation forces on a daily basis are not in euphoria. The people of Iran are not in euphoria, and the Israelis who have no shelter are not in euphoria. And eventually, I'm very, very terrified that we are going towards a very dark days, some very dark days. And I hope not. I hope that peace and justice will prevail, but I'm worried.
Up until recent days, US President Donald Trump had been pushing Iran to get to the negotiating table about its nuclear program. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said in the last hour or so that there is always a place for diplomacy, but this isn't the right time for it. And there are always a place for negotiations. This isn't the right time for it. In the longer term, if it was to ever get to the stage where those negotiations could start again, do you think that Israel would allow those to happen?
As we know thus far, the government of Israel, led by Netanyahu, has done whatever possible to undermine any kind of progress in the negotiations. And I imagine, I believe that this government will do the same if something like that happens. But I'm not very optimistic, I must say, about the chances of new negotiations because, you know, many, again, given the euphoria I mentioned before, many now say, including President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu and others, say that now the capabilities of Iran have been diminished. That is probably true. But the question is whether the motivation on the part of Iran has been diminished. And I'm afraid it's exactly the opposite. Because once Iran was attacked by Israel and afterwards by the United States, their motivation both to develop perhaps a nuclear weapon and not to be engaged in negotiations, that motivation may increase given the violation of the promises and of the progress that could have been made before United States launched its latest attack.
Please forgive me for interrupting you, and I apologize for doing that. I am conscious of the time that we have, but we are very grateful to you for being with us on Al Jazeera. Thank you very much indeed. World leaders are responding to the US attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. Saudi Arabia says it's following developments with great concern and calls on the international community to step up diplomatic efforts in what it describes as a highly sensitive period. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer supported the US action, saying Iran must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. He's urging Tehran to return to the negotiating table and pursue a diplomatic solution. Qatar says it deplores the deterioration and warns an increase in dangerous tension could lead to catastrophic repercussions in the region and internationally. Doha is urging all sides to halt military action and return to dialogue. Oman has previously mediated nuclear talks between the US and Iran, and it's calling the US strikes a serious violation of international law and the UN Charter. It condemns the escalation and expresses deep concern for the possible consequences. Adnan Hayejne is a professor of international relations and US foreign policy at Qatar University. He's joining us live from Jordan's capital, Amman. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. I was just reading out some of the responses that we've had from foreign governments to what's been going on, and of course from Gulf governments as well, who are very close to the scene of what's been going on. What's your assessment of the way the world is responding to this?
It seems to me the world is divided into two sides. One side is by headed by Netanyahu and Trump, and they have their own way of doing things in the region. And nobody's taken into consideration the interests of the people of the region and the whole world. A lot of people, even Europe, as well as some forces in the United States, as well in the region, and Europe want a peaceful resolution for the nuclear program in Iran, but nobody seems to listen. I think Trump even went against his promises to the people, the American people, of not getting involved in another war in the Middle East. But at the end of the day, Netanyahu had his own call, and I think he dragged the Middle East into the region, and nobody taken into consideration even the interests of the people here. People think it's a war only between Israel and Iran, and now the United States involved. And we know what when the United States get involved, it is only the start, and it will be dragged into war that maybe lasted for a few years and leave maybe a failed states, another failed states in the region. And now we have Israel has taken over all the countries in the Arab world, and the Arab world are kind of powerless how to respond to Israel. Israel is killing the Palestinians. More than 50,000 Palestinians were killed, and they want to transfer all the Palestinians into Jordan. Israel, under the leadership of Netanyahu, are taking control of Lebanon, some parts of Lebanon. They are attacking Yemen, they are attacking Syria, they're attacking everybody else. They have a big stick, and they want to control the whole region. If they cannot do it by themselves, they will have the United States do it, or get into their side to help them to do so.
We were reporting a couple of days ago on the UN Security Council meeting that was being held in New York to discuss the situation between Israel and Iran when Israel was carrying out the majority of the attacks. Russia and China both spoke at that meeting, but their responses were condemnatory of what was going on, but that seems to be as far as it's gone. What do you think is the position of Russia and China in this?
We hear a lot of condemnation by both superpowers. We call them great powers, Russia and China. But at the end of the day, they will not confront the United States. They will not the United States be dragged into another war, and it will be useful for them, I think, to do whatever they wish in terms of China and its ambition of being a hegemonic power to balance the United States. This is another opportunity because the United States were interested to concentrate on the rise of China, and Trump thinks that China is the main threat for American hegemony, and Russia will have a great free hand to do whatever it wishes in Ukraine. And we have the promises coming from Trump that he will solve all the problems of the world, and see what we get, another war in the Middle East.
Obviously, a lot of attention being paid on the way in which Iran is expected or may respond to what has been going on. What are your greatest concerns in that?
Well, if I were in the position of the Iranians, I will be rational, not be irrational like the United States. I will not maybe attack the interests of the American interests in the region, namely the military bases in the Gulf States, because this will emphasize and support the theory of Israel and the United States that Iran is a threat to the region. I think they may be using the United Nations Charter of Self-Defense, and they are defending themselves. They were open to negotiation. They were open to diplomatic negotiation regarding the Iranian nuclear program, but Israel took preventive measures, as would say, and now everybody's involved in that war. I am not sure what will happen next.
Adnan Khayejnet, we appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera. I want to go to Scott Lucas. He's a professor of US and international politics at University College Dublin. He's joining us live now from Wicklow in Ireland. Good to have you with us. Up until very recently, as we were just talking about, Donald Trump was trying very hard to get Iran back to the negotiating table for its nuclear talks. All of a sudden, there seems to be this diversion, and the US is carrying out attacks in Iran. Why do you think he did that?
Because Donald Trump got played by the Israelis. Some might say manipulated. You're absolutely right that we had these 5 sets of U.S.-Iran talks with the 6th scheduled for Oman last Sunday. But in mid-May, the Israelis, whose Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had been embarrassed in February when Trump said he was going to pursue the diplomatic path, the Israelis let Trump administration know, look, we're going ahead with the attacks. The Trump administration discussed this for a few weeks, and then on June 8th, so just a couple of weeks ago, they made the decision that if Israel was going to have to go in, they were going to actually support the attacks. So there was that first phase, right? And so over the course of the next 9 days, as Israel has hit not just nuclear sites, but military sites and civilian sites, the Trump administration has effectively buried negotiations and supported the Israelis, whatever Trump says about being a peacemaker. Because what the Israelis told the Trump administration is, look, you can still get your deal. You can still get that big photo opportunity in the deal with the Iranians, but they're more likely to negotiate with you if we have punished them. In other words, almost force them to surrender. And that's what Donald Trump keeps tweeting and tweeting and tweeting. The problem is, of course, is that the Iranians were not surrendering. So you got to the point this week where you had some advisors to Trump saying, you've got to go in, you've got to hit the nuclear sites. You had others who opposed it. Trump went wobbly just a few days ago. Remember the 2-week window? But then people who favored the attack got into his ear. He decided to approve it. And that's where we are now.
So we were hearing from our correspondents in the US about the split that appears to be happening amongst Donald Trump's supporters, those who were all in favor of this kind of attack, those who were dead against it and have been from the start. How much of a gamble is this for Donald Trump?
Yeah, there were two gambles for Trump, which is why just a few days ago, he started to back off from the attacks. The first gamble, which we await the result of, is whether or not the bunker busters would be effective in reaching the Fordow underground facility and would really cause damage. But the second was the domestic situation, where you have more traditional but hard right Republicans who have long campaigned for attacks on Iran. I'm thinking all the way back to John Bolton 20 years ago, and now you have people like Senator Ted Cruz. And then you have Trumpists like the polemicist Tucker Carlson or the former advisor Steve Bannon, who believe that the only U.S. intervention, the only U.S. military intervention that's justified is against China because of that great rivalry that they have. And Carlson in particular, who's also close to the Kremlin, has been arguing, don't hit Iran, don't go in against Iran. I think if this is a one-off strike, in other words, if it's limited to just this episode, then Trump gets away from the domestic problems of the split amongst his base. But if Fordow has not been damaged, if other nuclear sites continue to operate, then I think the Americans may have to go back in again, and Trump is going to have that risk that it is going to alienate some of his supporters.
We've been hearing from many congressional Democrats in the U.S. who've been certainly on social media, saying that Donald Trump should have talked to Congress before carrying out this attack. I wonder if you could just clarify that for us. Is he actually obliged to do that if this is a single attack, or does he have to do that only if the attack becomes a protracted one?
This goes back to legislation that was passed because of the Vietnam conflict. The U.S. never formally declared war over Vietnam, and Congress said in the mid-'70s, look, you can't just have an open-ended intervention. You have to come to us for authority. But the fact is that administrations ever since then have continued to avoid going to Congress. Ronald Reagan did so, for example, when you had the attacks on Panama or on Grenada, and indeed when you had the attack on Iraq. In 2003, you never had that formal authority specifically of saying we're going to war. It was done under another piece of legislation, the war on terror. So what happens here is that the Trump administration cites a specific threat, which is of Iran's nuclear weapon that it supposedly is constructing, and saying this was an imminent threat that we had to deal with, and thus they avoid having to get that declaration of war from Congress.
Scott Lucas is Professor of US and International Politics at University College Dublin, and as always, we're grateful to have you on Al Jazeera. So thank you very much indeed. At least 6 people have been killed in Israeli attacks in Gaza overnight during an internet blackout that lasted 5 hours. Among them was a married couple who died when their apartment to the north of Nuseirat was hit. At least 3 people were also killed in attacks on displaced people living in tents to the west of Khan Yunis. Hani Mahmoud is joining us live from Gaza City. At the moment, of course, the world's attention on Israel and Iran and the US. But the attacks continue by Israel in Gaza.
Yes, Rob, and just before going into the details of what happened in the past few hours, just let me bring our viewers' attention to that at this moment, there are many of the drones that are hovering in the skies of the Gaza. We could clearly hear the buzz sound of these drones. There are, in fact, more than one in the skies over Gaza City and the northern territories, and that's unfortunately, it's a bad omen. Once we see more than one drone, it means there is an expected attack to happen, and we don't know yet when is this going to happen or where is it going to happen, but it's been hovering for the past at least hour and 30 minutes around the area. Also, that was coupled or still coupled with many of the heavy explosion coming from the eastern part of Gaza City, Shujaia, Zaytun, and the Tufah neighborhood. These are the eastern part of Gaza City. Once populated, densely populated neighborhoods turn now into vast field of rubble due to the ongoing demolition of homes in the eastern area. Many of these homes, the clusters have been destroyed and flattened to the ground. But at earlier hours from the morning, attacks on tents housing displaced Palestinians in the city of Khan Yunis, followed by another attack in a residential apartment where a husband and his wife were killed, including one more in the eastern part of Khan Yunis city. There is also reports of many of the critically injured individuals as they were waiting near distribution sites in the eastern part of the city of Khan Yunis. They were shot at by the quadcopters and by the armored vehicles and the tanks stationed in the areas of Khan Yunis. It's a passage to many of the 80 trucks coming off the crossings into the southern part of the strip. And this is not the first time we're seeing this area being relentlessly attacked, or a crowd of people being attacked and shot at by the Israeli tanks in the area. That is happening while the global attention has shifted to what's going on and the rising escalation between Tehran and Tel Aviv. And again, the expectation was this was going to bring at least a calm into the area, but unfortunately, this is not happening. The genocidal acts continue to unfold. The humanitarian situations continue to get more challenging. We're talking about many of the humanitarian aid that were supposed to come in, even through the GHF, haven't been able to come into the people, even though it's a trickle amount. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has shut down operations for the past few days, citing security and logistics reasons behind the decision, leaving thousands of people hungry without a proper access to food, while at the same time, the Israeli military preventing organizations like Honor One, other organizations operating on the ground from delivering much needed aid. And that's, of course, affecting not just people on day-to-day life, but also critical facilities like hospitals. Shifa Hospital here in the Gaza Strip is overcrowded, is struggling very much to accommodate the injuries, struggle to provide much needed medical care, and that repeats itself over and over across the strip in hospitals like Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis and Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah city.
Hani, I understand what you're saying about the drones hovering overhead that usually come before an Israeli attack. I just want to say that if you and the team need to get to safety, or wherever safety you can get to, then you just go ahead and do it. But in the meantime, can you just tell me about the kind of conditions that people are having to live in at the moment? Because we're not just talking about the lack of delivery of aid, are we? We're talking about the lack of sanitation, the lack of water supplies as well.
Absolutely, and this is another daily struggle for people. Not only that water has been quite limited and very scarce in areas where water is much needed. In displacement sites, people are going through much of the difficulties on their daily life. Water for just washing is not available, let alone for human consumption. It's not safe enough because it's mostly contaminated. But the lack of sanitation and hygiene and other critical facilities are causing many of the problems. Let's not forget we are just entering summertime and it's getting hot, it's humid, and it's the lack of water and sanitation just creating this favorite conditions and favorite environment for the spread of infectious diseases. Living in a tent in summertime is not a pretty thing. This is not a one-night activity in the wilderness. People have been staying in these tents for over 20 months now, just enduring many of the difficulties and the terrible, difficult condition. Whether it's winter time, they had to endure the cold of the winter and the rain and the floods, and now summertime, the heat, the spread of mosquitoes and flies, and that are creating much of the favorite conditions for the spread of disease, particularly skin disease that has started to spread here. Many of the cases have been already documented inside the hospitals. And of course, all of this, the lack of water, sanitation and hygiene, is adding much more pressure on the hospital, because while hospitals are trying to provide medical care to the injured ones, now they have to get their attention to the other byproducts of this genocide. Many of these diseases needs immediate medical attention. Without it, it's going to only exacerbate and create much more challenging life for a population already traumatized, displaced, and maimed for 20 months.
Hani, thank you very much indeed. Hani Mahmoud there talking to us from Gaza City. You're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder of the latest developments in our breaking news coverage of the Israel-Iran conflict, which the U.S. has now entered. Iran's foreign minister says the U.S. has crossed a red line by attacking its three main nuclear sites. Abbas Araghchi says diplomacy is no longer an option, as the Americans only understand the language of threat and force. The U.S. president says a full payload of bombs was dropped on each Iranian nuclear site. Donald Trump says operations at the Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan plants have been totally obliterated. Iran has retaliated to the U.S. attacks by firing missiles into Israel. They struck northern and central areas, including the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa. Katya's Lopez Odien has more on the latest developments.
Iranian strikes began within hours of the U.S. joining the conflict. The damage is extensive, with sites in and around Haifa and Tel Aviv being bombed.
We were in the center of Israel, center division of Israel. A missile fire hit right inside of a building complex behind me.
Iran says it also targeted Israel's main airport, Ben Gurion.
Ben Gurion Airport, the regime's biological research center and alternative command and control centers, were hit during this wave by guided missiles equipped with maneuverable warheads. These were guided until the moment of impact and carried various types of high explosive destructive payloads.
As sirens blare, thousands of Israelis head to underground shelters like this one in Tel Aviv.
And I was really happy that, Trump has decided to act, finally. I think it will end the war. This is my hope. Maybe it is wishful thinking, but, I hope it will be fine.
Above ground, the damage is clear. This neighborhood in central Israel, one of several hit. Bolstered by support from the Trump administration, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has previously declared Israel is ready to continue its attacks against Iran for as long as it takes. Now, across the Middle East, many are questioning if U.S. strikes will mark the beginning of an end to the conflict or lead to an escalation and a broader regional conflict. Katia Lopez Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Earlier, my colleague Sarah Khairat spoke to Mehran Kamrallah, a professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. He says Iran is preparing for a war of attrition.
civilians on all sides are suffering, and they're suffering a great deal. I think all eyes are now on Iran to see how Iran will respond. Up until now, we've been waiting for the United States to see if the Americans would respond. But now we're looking at Iran, and of course the Iranian Revolutionary Guards has just announced that now the war has started. So Iran appears to be digging its heels in and is readying itself for a prolonged war of attrition.
One of our analysts was earlier saying that so far what we've seen with Iran is sort of tit for tat, really more a reaction to what Israel has been doing. Are we likely to see a change, a shift in the way Iran is going to be operating moving forward?
I don't think so. I think your analyst was correct. What we have seen is Iran's proportionate response. I don't think Iran, or the United States for that matter, wants to see an escalation of this conflict. The only one who wants to see this conflict expand in scope and extent is Netanyahu. But no, I think Iran wants to see this conflict be contained as much as possible. But of course, they would have to respond to the latest American attack.
Hello, I'm Malin Saeed. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our continuing coverage of the U.S. strikes on Iran. Tehran accuses the U.S. of betraying international diplomacy by attacking 3 nuclear sites in the country.
We were in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans. Happened only 2 days ago in Geneva, when this time Americans decided to blow it up.
Overnight, President Trump ordered stealth bombers to strike at the heart of Iran's nuclear program.